I'm Cody Horton with Diverse Recruiting Experts. I'm really thrilled to have Ben Hasan with us here today to share some great information on lessons learned from building a sustainable D&I program. Ben, I want to thank you for joining us. I know you've got a busy schedule, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to share your insights and lessons learned at Walmart. I also think you've got a great background as a technology leader and will provide a unique perspective to our audience today. So let's start by learning a little bit about Ben Hasan. Can you tell me about your background and what led you to the current role as Walmart's Chief Culture, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer?
Yeah, Cody, thanks. And thanks for having me, and appreciate the invitation and participate. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and ask myself the same question. I was like, how did I end up in this gig? A little bit about me. I'm an inner city kid. I grew up in North Philadelphia, played a little basketball, dropped out of college a couple times, and, finally said, hey, you know what? I need to go back to school. So I got really lucky early in my career. Early in school, and I took a computer science class, and I actually fell in love with it. So my undergraduate degree is from Temple University. It was in a business school, but it was like hardcore programming. It was the same stuff that folks take in the engineering schools today. So I have a computer science undergraduate degree. Left Philly, moved to Texas. I worked for a company called EDS for a couple of years. I worked for a local gas company in Dallas for about 15 years. Got a phone call about a job at a startup company called Dell Computers. It was a $6 billion company when I joined them in '97. And I spent 11 really cool years at Dell. Got to travel the world. Been to India 42 times, Taipei, Singapore, all over Asia. We were actually beginning to develop product internationally. And so I had small teams that helped support that work. Got another interesting phone call about the job at Fortune 5 is what they told me in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I was like, okay, there's no Fortune 5 in Fayetteville. This has got to be Walmart. And 13 years ago almost, I took a job working at Walmart, all in tech this whole time. And I spent the first 7 years in tech jobs here, started as a vice president, got promoted to SVP 3 years in. And I was in my dream job, Cody. A 900 person team, 3 different countries, $1.5 billion budget, reporting to the chief information officer. And I get this weird phone call. Hey, you're one of 5 finalists for the chief diversity officer job, about 6 years ago. I'm like, how am I a finalist for a job I didn't apply for? And, long story short, I go in and talk to the head of HR at the time. And she said, hey, here's all the reasons you should take the job. I'm still trying to get out of it. And then I go and talk to the CEO. And I'm like, Doug, I didn't even apply for this job. How am I actually the finalist for something I didn't apply for? I think back over my career, and I was doing a lot of mentoring. I have been doing a lot of mentoring my whole career. I got a lot of that kind of help early on in my career. As you could imagine, there weren't a lot of people who looked like me in tech 30 years ago. I had an amazing mentor at Dell who was actually the chief diversity officer. His name was Thurman Woodard. He helped me through some really tough times at Dell. And so Doug he looked at me and said, hey, I think you can have an influence on the whole company if you take this job. And it was a conundrum for me because you work so hard to, kind of move up and do more for your family, if we're honest about, our want for, more responsibility, more money, a bigger title. And now you ask me to take a job that's a whole lot smaller budget, a whole lot smaller staff, to argue with people about things they don't want to talk about anyway. And, but I, once I knew they really wanted me, I negotiated my way to get a little bit more, which, we all should do. Hey, they want me to do this, then let's talk about what it's worth. And I've been doing the job for 6 years. And when I remember when I came home and talked to my wife, um, she looked at me and she said, you know what, Ben, I've often heard you say, if you could do as well helping people every day as you've done working in tech, you'd spend your life helping people every day. And now you have the opportunity to do it. So stop whining about your big job and your big organization and take a shot. Like you asked me to take a shot when I left Austin, Texas to move to Bentonville, Arkansas. I never forget, she asked me, pull out the map and show me where Bentonville is. And I asked her, I said, give me 2 years. I said, and if you don't like it after 2 years, we'll find a larger city. And we've been here, almost 13. She told me, take the job for 2 years. And if you don't like it, I'm sure they'll let you move back to tech. And again, January will be 6 years in the gig. So 33 years as a technologist and 6 years in January doing the work that I'm doing today. It's the most rewarding, but sometimes the most challenging job I've ever had, Cody.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, I started my career in tech, so I totally understand that shift. But it's fascinating that you've spent the majority of your life, adult career in tech, and now here you are leading inclusion and diversity for the world's largest company. What was the rationale in selecting a technologist to lead the D&I initiatives at Walmart?
So once I decided to take the job, I went back and asked that question. I was like, Doug, okay, what was the rationale? And I'm actually good friends with the lady who was head of HR at the time. We still stay in touch. And she said, Ben, the work you have been doing around mentoring across the organization, every gender and ethnicity and belief, we had our eye on it. We saw what you were doing. At one time, I had 10 or 15 mentoring circles. And she said, we just thought that you had credibility from a business standpoint and that you could figure out what needs to be done in the D&I space. What Doug said to me was pretty profound. He said, look, Ben, if traditional practitioners of D&I had it all figured out, we wouldn't 30 years plus later still be discussing and having the same issues we have today. So he said, Ben, I want you to take the problem, turn it upside down, look at it like a system, take a systems approach and use your technology background of understanding systems to look at this as a system and how do we address it systemically, because we need a systemic change. And so that's what he asked me to do. So looking back, and again, I'll be honest, when he said that to me, I was like, okay, I don't even know how I'm going to do that, but it sounded good, right? But that's exactly what we've done. We are trying to make systemic change across the life cycle of HR is really where we've been focused. Where do you recruit? Who do you hire? Who gets promoted? How are people compensated? What happens in calibration? And how do you actually address that system in a way that you look for where unconscious bias may be in the system and actually begin to root it out? We call it bias interrupters. How do you place bias interrupters in place along the life cycle of the HR processes? I believe that one of the most insidious places that unconscious bias lives in corporation is right in the HR processes. And our ability to begin to understand, number one, that we all have unconscious bias. Number two, it plays out in decisions we make about people. And number three, you don't have to react. Your first reaction to your unconscious bias should be to stop and pause and think and recognize, okay, are my biases playing out as I'm making these decisions along the life cycle? That's some of our approach and what we're trying to teach leaders. Because you can't eliminate unconscious bias. We all have them. Yeah. The neuroscientists say if you have an unconscious bias that gets a good result, it's a good unconscious bias. You have an unconscious bias that gets a bad result, it's a bad unconscious bias. but we can train leaders that they actually influence and affect decisions they make about people.
Yeah, no, I think that that systems approach makes a lot of sense, and every system has the components that make up that system, right? One of the things that I wanted to get your thoughts on, culture, diversity, inclusion are common terms that are used in the business environment. However, every company approaches those a little bit differently. Can you talk a little bit about how Walmart defines those terms, culture, diversity, and inclusion, and kind of what's the vision and the strategy that you're putting in for this work?
Yeah, when we started, that's where we started because our early belief was language is important and consistency in the language is important. And people actually understanding what you mean when you say culture, diversity, inclusion um, um, is important because you can't move the work forward if people aren't on the same page about the work. So when we talk about our culture, we have four basic fundamental values of our company. And it is service to the customer, respect for the individual, um, excellence in everything we do on a foundation of integrity. So when we talk about culture, we simply say, because we want to keep it simple so that people can remember, our culture are our values in action every day. When you see those values in action, that's what our culture is. We try to stay away from traditions and artifacts and things that people say, well, that's the way we've always done it. That's really not culture. Culture is about the everyday mores and the everyday actions that exist in your organization. So that's what we call culture. When we talk about diversity, we simply say it's the unique identities, experiences, styles, abilities, and perspective of our workforce. So diversity is it just is. It's all of those differences. Inclusion, though, is what we call the intentional action of understanding and supporting and championing those individuals in all their uniqueness in a way that results in them being the best that they can be every day so that they come to work believing this is a place that I'm welcome, that I'm comfortable, and that I'm safe. When we talk about vision, again, we have 1.6 million people in the US, mostly who are hourly. And so it was important to us when we talk about vision to keep it simple because we want people to be able to say, here's the vision. And our vision for my office and for culture, diversity, inclusion is everyone included. And that means everyone. That leaves no one out. That includes women and people of color, but it also includes white males because we actually want white males at the table helping us move the work forward. And then our mission is just to create an inclusive culture where all associates are engaged to deliver on our mission, which is to help people save money so that they can live better. So those are kind of the components of our vision, mission, definitions, and that's kind of the foundation upon which all of our work sits. We've used those definitions now for almost 6 years.
Wow. Well, you're doing some amazing work at Walmart. The way we're set up, you got to engage with the communities that exist, and the climate in our world right now, in the countries, in the communities that we work in. There's a lot of division, and they're charged with narratives that either directly or indirectly involve aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do you and your team engage and take cues from the social discourse that's happening? And can you talk about some of the initiatives that you've undertaken to be relevant in this process? And what are some of the current state of affairs in the nation, and how are you kind of addressing those?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think back about 4 years ago, there were a series of shootings in the street. Alandro Castro and several other African-American males were killed in the street. We have almost 300,000 African-Americans who work for us here in the US. And people are in pain. When that stuff happens in the street, people are not checking it at the front door when they show up. And early on, when those things were happening, I was getting email after email from associates saying, Ben, are we going to say something? Is the company going to say something? And so here's what we learned. And we did it again after George Floyd. It is really important to say something. It is really important as a company to tie the fact that what we're seeing in the street doesn't align with the values of who we are and our beliefs about respect for the individual, which is our first value of our company, is that we respect all individuals. We should respect all individuals. So we live in a day and time, I believe, where businesses can no longer sit on the sideline and not acknowledge what's happening all around us to our customers. So that's part of our playbook now. Something happens, we're going to say something. We're going to make a statement about it so that people know where we stand. The other thing we've learned is that people want to talk. And so we have held literally hundreds of listening sessions around the company where we in our playbook is pretty simple. The leader starts the discussion talking about how they're impacted, right? They ask the leader or two, would you mind sharing as well how you're impacted? And then we open the floor up for anyone who wants to talk about it. And the first time I did this, I did it with the CEO. And remember, he walked in the room late. He wasn't supposed to be there. This was 4 years ago. And I said, Doug, what are you doing here? You said you had meetings. He said, yeah, I know, but this is important. And so he said, there's microphones in the aisle. There was about 1,200 people in the auditorium and several thousand on the WebEx. At the time we were using WebEx. And I said, yeah, I told him not to put microphones in the aisle. He said, why? I said, I don't know what people might say. He goes, what are you afraid of? And I remember thinking to myself, well, heck, if you're not afraid, I'm not afraid. He said, let them talk. He said, you don't have to answer every question. You're not going to have a can't answer. You know, as long as people are respectful and respecting each other's opinions and beliefs, let them talk. You know, sometimes the best thing for us to say after they talk is, thank you. Thank you for sharing. You know, I appreciate you taking the time to share. And the interesting thing is, this is really hard, right? It's hard for leaders to actually have these difficult conversations because these are things that we don't talk about. We've been trained not to talk about it. Yeah. But what we tell our leaders are, and because we've had 2 cycles of this where there's been these big sessions, the first cycle was harder than the second. The one after George Floyd's murder, that cycle was easier. But it's like athletes or actors or performers. The things you get great at are the things you practice. So you know, it's like stage fright. The first time you do it, it's really hard. The second or third time you do it, you kind of go, you know what? Yeah. I'm figuring this out, you know? And being authentic and sharing, you know, how you feel is a great way to get other people to share how they feel. And interesting, I've sat in hundreds of these literally. And many times when we open it up, there's complete silence. No one says anything. And that's okay, because eventually somebody will say something. So that's part of what we do. And the other thing I'll mention really quickly is we've got this series of speaking and listening sessions that we call the RACE series, Raising Authentic Conversations about Equity. So we've had outside speakers come in and talk to the organization about how do we create an equitable organization where people get what they need, not equality, where everyone gets the same thing, but equity, where people actually get what they need in order to be successful, and that we're working toward removing roadblocks so that people have the same access and opportunity regardless of who they are. So those are a couple of the things that we've been doing internally to address what's happening outside the company and around the United States.
Yeah, that's some amazing stuff that you're doing. I know that I've seen your CEO out talking. I certainly have seen other Walmart leaders out in the spaces. You're known to frequently and passionately talk about the business case for inclusion. How does Walmart think about the business case of inclusion for for the workforce, and then just thinking about what it means to all the suppliers that work with Walmart.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love that question, because if I think back almost 6 years ago, that was a big question in this space. Well, what's the business case? What's the business? Tell me what the business case of why we should be doing this work. And looking back with kind of a grin on my face, I almost go, well, that sounds like a excuse not to do the work. Well, prove to me that this is important, and then maybe I'll consider doing it. Right. I believe that organizations that are early on their journey, because this is a journey, I believe there's like 4 levels of expertise as it relates to where diversity and inclusion can go in an organization. And I think early on, this discussion about the business case is what happens. I think the further you get along on the journey, the less and less the business case is anything that the senior leaders talk about. But I'll share some recent research from Citigroup, and I love this. They've said that if we could close the racial gaps on wage, home ownership, education, and fair lending, that in 5 years, we could add $5 trillion of additional GDP. Wow. So if we make this world a better place for everyone financially, if we make this country a better place for everyone financially, it actually improves the health of the whole country. And so I don't have to spend a lot of time debating business case today, Cody, with the leaders here, because they actually get it. They actually get the fact that creating a better place for all citizens in this country makes this country a better place.
Wow. Yeah, that's really powerful, Ben. To get that done, it requires leaders, right? And I know that the people that are doing it, like you, Doug McMillan, other leaders at Walmart, so what are the characteristics that of an inclusive leader, and why is it so important to Walmart's leaders of today, and then the future leaders of tomorrow? What's the company doing to help identify and develop inclusive leaders?
Yeah, so we actually have a something we call inclusive education curriculum. So we literally have curated and developed content for leaders so that they actually become focused on this notion of inclusion in the way that they lead. And our officers actually have a requirement to take these courses to become more and more inclusive in their approach of leading. I'll tell you, we have spent a lot of time working with Deloitte Consulting, and Deloitte Consulting has what I think is one of the best models of inclusive leadership. And they have 6 signature traits, and they're called the 6 C's of what inclusive leaders are all about. The first one is this notion of curiosity, because different ideas and experiences enable growth in each and every one of us. The second C is cultural intelligence, because not everyone sees the world through the same lens. The third one is this notion of collaboration, because diverse thinking teams are greater than the sum of their parts. The fourth one is commitment, because the work is hard and you've got to be committed to doing the work. The fifth one is courage, because talking about our imperfections actually, there's personal risk in doing that. And then the sixth one is this notion of cognizance, because bias is every leader's Achilles heel. We purposely, Cody, we tried to move away from a compliance approach to doing D&I to a neuroscience and a social science approach. So what do I mean when I say that? The neuroscience approach is basically this: how do you educate leaders on the fact that you got a fast brain and a slow brain, that your brain is 2% of your body weight and it uses 20% of your energy. The fact that we spend 95% plus of our waking hours in the fast side of our brain and the rest in the slow side. All of our unconscious biases live on the fast side. And the reason why we stay over there is because you burn less glucose because you don't have to think. I use this example all the time. This is an example of fast brain, slow brain. 10 times 10. Everyone knows the answer.
Yeah.
Fast brain, right? 18 times 46. People shut down because you have to shift from your fast brain to your slow brain to actually do that math. And most people will sit there and go, I'm gonna let someone else do that math because I don't want to go over there because I'm gonna burn glucose over there. So that's why I say the brain is the mother of all bias, because that's where we live. And we all like to think that we're this caring, loving human being who sees things rationally. But that actually exists over in your slow brain. And we don't spend a lot of time over there. We're making decisions all day, every day. So what is my point? My point is, once you recognize that's how your brain works, and then you're making decisions about people along the HR life cycle, the neuroscientists say, when you experience difference, your first reaction to difference is almost always a non-inclusive one. So you and the neuroscientists say you can actually rewire your brain once you understand this to pause and not react to your first reaction. And so that's what we're trying to teach leaders. We're not trying to change them. And we're not trying to say, get rid of all your biases, unconscious biases, because you can't. You can't get rid of them, but you can actually begin to rewire your brain. I love this stuff. So I'm sorry, Cody, I'm going to go a little bit longer. The neuroscientists, the one we've been working with, he said, practice makes, and most people's answer is perfect. And he said, no, practice makes something called myelin. And myelin is, think of a electrical wire that has plastic coating on it. The neural network in your brain is actually adding that coding every time as you do something over and over. It's adding that coding, and it actually creates the environment where you continue to do things the same way because your practice of it has made myelin. And what the neuroscientists say is that you can actually, once you realize that's going on, you begin to rewire your own brain to make decisions differently. So that's the neuroscience part of our approach. The social science part of our approach is we've been working with a group out of Greensboro, North Carolina called the Racial Equity Institute. And they do a 2-day in-depth workshop on the history of race in this country from 1619 to present. And so one of our other beliefs is, as you begin to educate leaders on how we have become so situated, what were the laws and practices that were put in place? What was the first affirmative action program that was created so that one group of people advantaged over another? We believe as you begin to educate leaders on that now you create a more holistic, inclusive leader who actually can manage in a multicultural, multi-diverse, multi-belief society in a way that's more inclusive. So, sorry to go so long. I see a couple people in the chat posting the book that I'm quoting from. I steal shamelessly, y'all. You don't have to invent this stuff all, on your own. I tease the kids I talk to all the time. I was like, hey, when I was growing up and when you were doing research, you had to know the Dewey Decimal System, right? You had to know how to go in the library, pull those little stupid boxes out, get the card, and hope that someone put the book back where it's supposed to be. And now you don't have to do that. Now, you actually can get on these things, which this thing has more power than the first computer I worked on that filled up a whole room. And this thing has more power than that. So the ability to educate yourself on any topic is, I believe, it's at a worldwide height, and we should all be taking care of it. That's a long answer to a short question, but I love this stuff.
No, Ben, you know, and the passion that you have is it's pretty amazing for this, and just the focus. And I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing that science into it and neurology into it, because a lot of times people just think it's a motivation thing, it's a historical thing, but we're wired that way. So I really am thrilled, and I can see just looking at some of the comments that are coming in, people are thrilled and really just kind of eating this up, Ben, for sure. You know, one of the things, and I suspect that when you got that call for this role, that brain kicked in, right? And you did not want to go do this. And so, and I'm sure a lot of people who get asked to do this job are in that same mindset. So what have you learned that might help others who are going to be stepping into that first CDO role, or even another CDO role that's bigger than the last one they had? What have you learned that might help them as they're thinking about this?
You know, the first thing I know is that you can't do this without top leadership. And I don't just mean some of the top leadership, I mean with the leader of the company. You need commitment from the CEO in order to actually be successful in the work. You need resources. You know, it's interesting. Like I said, I've talked to a lot of people since George Floyd's murder who've been asked to take this role on, and it's just them. And you know, you got a 20, 30, 40, 100,000 person organization, and they've asked you to take this role, and there's no resources. So I'm like, look, anything a company is serious about, they will invest dollars and resources in it. And so so that's the other thing I would say. You got to ask for resources. If I was starting out, I'd create at least 3 functions as a new CDO that's starting from scratch. You need access to data. You need access to the HR data so that you can get representation data on people of color and gender in a way that you can begin to examine your organization and begin to ask yourself, does our representation look like we want it to look? And if it doesn't, what are the practices, policies, and behaviors we need to begin to put in place to actually begin to get the representation that we want? But representation is not enough. You also got to focus on how do we create a culture that if we did get the representation we want, that they'll actually stay because the culture is inclusive and respects them for who they are. So you got to be able to get at data. You got to have someone who does strategy. And I'll tell you, I took my old tech strategy guy and I said, hey, come do strategy for me. He's like, what do I know about D&I strategy? I'm like, what do I know about D&I? But you know strategy. So help me develop a strategic approach to do this work. And then the last thing I'll tell you is you need to actually focus on communication and branding, right? How do you communicate and brand what it is your aspiration is, both internal and external, so that you can actually begin to tell a story about the work you're doing, to begin to get people to believe that the story you're telling is something that the company is actually trying to accomplish. So those would be kind of the 3 functional things. But the most important thing is getting leaderships to stand up and say, this is something that's important. I remember one of my early conversations with Doug, he asked me, he said, how can I help? And again, I wish I was smart enough to have thought this all out, but you know, sometimes, you know, we end up being blessed with insight that comes from we don't know where. What I said to him was, I said, Doug, when you talk about the business, when you talk about the integration of our digital business with our physical business in a way that we can serve customers when they want, where they want, anytime they want, how they want, making it seamless to the customer, taking the friction out of our ability to serve customers. I said, if you close with, and we want this to be an inclusive place for everyone, for customers and for our associates. I said, that's all I need you to say right now. And he goes, what? That's it? And I said, that's it. And he said, should I say anything more? I said, Doug, you will figure out on your own what to say more. But when you start talking about inclusion, and that was one of the big changes we made when I took this job, we spent more time talking about inclusion, including everyone. I'm going to say this again, including white males. Yeah. And I got a lot of emails from white males who said, Ben, this is the first time I felt like I could participate in the work. I've been afraid to say anything. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. But we actually need them at the table helping, because 9 times out of 10, they're in the jobs that can really make a difference. And as Doug began to talk about inclusion, people began to make the connection, because the diversity office was talking about inclusion. And so he's the biggest advocate for the work now. And it makes it a lot easier for us to get the work done, because it's actually part of the business strategy now. Our inclusive approach supports the diversity that we have in the organization.
That's amazing to hear that, just that focus on inclusion. Some point companies are going to want to measure, right? They're going to want to know, hey, how do we know we're being successful? How does Walmart measure and monitor success with diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging efforts?
Yeah, so so I'm a data guy. So that's actually where I started, right? At one point, the data scientists who were responsible for people data was actually part of my group when I first took the job. And to be honest with you, I spent a lot more time with them than on the D&I stuff, because I was more comfortable with them, because I knew the language that they spoke. So we have all the typical measurements, and we can tell you by gender, by ethnicity, by age, how many people are in every job level, from executive vice president all the way to hourly. We have all that data. We can tell you movement, how often people are getting promoted. We can tell you turnover data. We can tell you how long people are staying in job. We've got all of that kind of analysis, and that's really important to track. The other thing we can tell you is we can tell you by ethnicity and gender from our associate engagement survey, what is the sentiment of people by gender and ethnicity. So we can we have an inclusion index that's part of our associate engagement survey. We have a culture index. We have a net promoter score, and we have an engagement index. So that's how we measure sentiment. And obviously, all this data isn't shared everywhere, but the leaders of the organization and my team and the people team, the HR team, have access, and we can identify where the hotspots in the organization. Do African-American women feel different about the culture than white women do? Do Asian men feel different about inclusion than Hispanic men? So we can actually map that data and find the hotspots, and then look for opportunities to put programs in place to address where we see hotspots. So the data is really important, and not just the measurement data, but the sentiment data. How do people feel is very, very important.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I know we've got some questions coming in. I'm gonna grab a couple questions here in a second. Our focus today is primarily around talent acquisition, talent development. What's Walmart's approach to recruiting and growing talent, and what role does inclusion play in that process?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll tell you, we have evolved. So part of my team's strategic approach has been, how do you take the Office of Culture, Diversity, Equity, we've added equity to our name now, and inclusion, and embed it along the life cycle of HR. So how do you embed it in your recruiting approach? How is that fundamental to the way you recruit, the way you hire, who gets promoted, how assignments happen, how does compensation happen, and then how do people leave, right? What's the process for when people leave the company? How do you embed CD&I in that in a way that it's just part of the way they do business? I will tell you, we've evolved to a point where I actually have partners who work in talent acquisition, that their responsibility is diversity and inclusion. So, and they liaison back to my group for content and subject matter expertise about how that should be embedded in their work. We just started doing that. I think that is kind of the next level. It's one thing to talk about doing it. It's another thing to actually embed it and then partner back with the diversity office. We also have D&I folks in our learning and development organization that are going to be responsible for the same thing. The one that's been in talent, she's been there about a year. We're actually getting ready to put one in our learning and development organization that will partner back with my organization again for subject matter expertise, for content that should actually be embedded in our learning and development programs. So that's our approach for how we take the work out of my office and actually embed it in those processes.
I mean, that's some amazing stuff. I always say that retention starts with recruiting, right? If it's all connected and you get that right up front, you just increase your chance for retention. While we're talking about some of the talent development work, what's your approach to mentorship and sponsorship? And, what are some of the steps that the company's taking to introduce more formalized mentoring and sponsoring programs? And, how does inclusion and allyship play a role in the mentoring and sponsoring associates for career growth?
Well, I told you that when we see good stuff, we borrow shamelessly. So there's a board member of ours. Her name is Carla Harris. So Carla Harris sits on our board. She used to be the chair of the Executive Leadership Council. Simply amazing woman. She's got a TED Talk on advisor, mentor, sponsor. We believe that advisor is someone you just go to for advice, someone who may be in a job that you want, someone that you might admire, someone who might have had past experiences that you want to learn more about. We believe mentors are those that you can go tell everything that's going on with you. Here's what's going on. Here's what's working for me. Here's what's not working. We believe that you can have mentors who don't even know that they're your mentor. I believe personally that you don't go ask someone, will you be my mentor and can I meet with you on the second Tuesday of the third month every 3 weeks? Because 9 times out of 10, people are going to say, no, I don't have time for that. Plus, after the first meeting, you may decide, oh my God, I never want to talk to this person again. But you've committed for a year of meetings. So my recommendation always is seek out people who you want to mentor you. You don't actually have to ask them to be your mentor. You can ask for 15 or 20 minutes for them to tell you about their background, their career. Here's the thing about many executives. There's been research that said a larger number of senior executives are introverts than extroverts. And that as nervous as you are about going in, meeting with a mentor who might be 2 or 3 levels above you, and how am I going to spend 30 minutes with this person? They're just as nervous as you are. But they can all talk about themselves for 30 minutes. So get a set of questions that get them talking about themselves. And then what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want them to remember about you? And then at the end of the meeting, the question you ask is, do you mind if from time to time, I might seek to get another 15 or 30 minutes on your calendar? Most people will say yes to that. But if you ask for a meeting every second Tuesday, the third month of the full moon, every time, they're going to say no, because I'm busy. I don't have time. Plus, I already have mentors. You can eventually develop mentors like that. Sponsors is a different story. And I always say, you want to look for people to be a sponsor there's this old financial services company called E.F. Hutton. And they used to have these commercials that said, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. So you want to identify in your org structure, who's E.F. Hutton? Who is it that when they talk, people listen? And it isn't always your boss or even your boss's boss. It might be one of their peers. So identifying who that is, and then I tell my mentees, then you ask the question. If someone asks about Cody, if I went to ask this E.F. Hutton about Cody, would they know who you are? Would they say something positive, or would they say something negative? And what you want is to have relationships with E.F. Hutton that would say something positive about you. You don't tell your sponsors every single thing that's going on in your life, but you do want them to know enough about you and your work that they will take your paper in the room and speak up for you in the room when you're not in the room. See, the thing about corporate America, That's how promotions happen. Promotions happen in a room that you're never in. I'm a big fan of the Broadway play Hamilton. And one of my favorite songs is when Hamilton convinced the Southern early founding fathers to let him create the Treasury, which is pretty much the exact way he designed it, during that time. And the way he convinced them was he said, hey, we'll move the capital to the DC area from where it was at the time if you let me implement the Treasury the way I want. And so the song went something like, I want to be in the room when it happens. No one was in the room when it happens. Promotions happen in the room when you're not there, and you need someone speaking up in that room for you in a way that gets you the opportunities that you might not otherwise get. And that only happens through the relationships you've created. And it takes time. Sponsors take time. We ask all of our officers to mentor and sponsor, but we don't do assigned sponsorship because we actually don't think that works. We do have a tool we have internally that does blind matching for people who are interested in mentees or mentors. But some people, this is natural. They know how to go do this on their own. Others need help. So we've developed an internal tool where people can go in and either ask for mentors or mentees, and we'll do blind matching. You can send an email back and forth to each other and set your meeting up through that tool.
Yeah, that sounds like it really levels the playing field and makes it the knowledge accessible to anybody who's genuinely interested in it. One of the things, Ben, is kind of a common issue with a lot of inclusion and diversity programs is really lack of that genuine inclusion. And what's Walmart doing to really ensure that diversity is not seen as kind of this numbers game, but it's actually used as a resource to strengthen the culture and overall well-being for the company in the long run?
Yeah, I think part of our what we're trying to do, Cody, is shift the conversation to a conversation about inclusion, and ask leaders to begin to develop skills and techniques around what it means to be an inclusive leader. I think our shift from a compliance-based approach to a neuroscience and a social science based approach is a key to really getting leaders to think differently about how they lead. I didn't mention that the work that we're doing with the Racial Equity Institute, I actually attended the first class with that institute in 2017 in New Orleans. They were actually doing that work in New Orleans in the community. And we brought them in. I think we're one of the first corporations to bring them inside the corporation to really have discussions about the history of race. Early this year, Doug went through a 2-day session on Zoom. So to think about getting the CEO of Fortune 1 to sit on Zoom for 2 days to go over the history of race in the country, it was a phenomenal session. That night, he sent me a note and he said, hey, I want every officer in the company in the US, 430 odd officers, to go through the session. So we're in the process now of training 430 officers, 2 days on Zoom, 45 officers each session. See, one of the reasons why we believe diversity programs fail, because it's too much compliance, it's too much thou shalt do this, versus how do you actually educate and begin to address people's hearts and minds around what it is to lead in a more inclusive way. So that's been our approach. We think for officers, particularly because our CEO went through this session and it was so impactful. I mean, everybody who goes to this session comes out, you come out a different person because it's not history that's taught in school for any of us, even history majors. We had a PhD history major in one of the sessions, and she came out saying, I never learned any of this stuff. And so our hope and prayer is we don't want to change who you are, but we do want to change how you might think. And we believe that if we can help change how you think, that you're actually going to be a more inclusive leader at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know we're coming on time, Ben. So I want to be respectful of your time. We got some questions in here, so I'm going to try to combine a couple of the questions into this one question. Um, what advice would you leave our audience with today if they're seeking to live and lead more inclusively from their own positions of influence? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I have kind of been saying this same thing over and over. I get this question a lot, Cody, and I call it the 3 L's. Um, my mother had 6 kids, and at one point, she had a newborn, a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And I think about her a lot, and what it must have been like trying to raise that many kids that close together. But one of the tapes that plays in my head continually, she used to say all the time, because we argued a lot, 6 kids that close together, everybody always thought they were right. And she used to say this all the time, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use your mouth proportionately. And I remember early on as a kid, I was like, what does proportionally mean? As I got older and understand what she's saying, she was like, listen, right? Spend more time listening than talking. So that's the first thing I would say. Regardless of where you are, where you sit in the organization, in your family, whatever, listening is a key component of what it's going to take for us to get through what the challenges that we face today. I think it was Albert Einstein, maybe not, who said, one of the signs of pure genius is the ability to listen to someone else's point of view and not feel like you have to accept it, that you're not conjuring in your head your response while they're talking. So listen is first. The second is lead where you are. We can all be leaders in our own right. And we can all lead in a way that helps bring people forward and not push people back. And then the third L is learn. Be a lifelong learner. I mentioned this earlier. There is so much information and data out there that's available for anyone. Carve out time, carve out 15 minutes a week, 30 minutes a week to just learn something else. Learn about people that might be different from you. Learn about other people's point of view. Don't get so stuck in your own way that you don't have the ability to continue to learn. So lead, listen, and learn would be my advice. The other thing I'll say is 2020, there will be books written about 2020, the pandemic, George Floyd, the uprising, the election, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. My hope and prayer is that when they read those books, they'll talk about people like us and say they were on the right side of history. They actually made the right decisions to try to make this a better world for everyone. And I think we should all, that should be an objective of all of us. None of us are going to be on this planet forever. But there will be people that are connected to us, family members, friends, et cetera, who will be here, years and years from now, and they'll pass judgment on how we treated this time. So I think we should take that seriously, Cody.
Yeah, no, Ben, this has been amazing. I've been looking at the comments coming through through the chat and some of the questions coming in. I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been invaluable. We didn't get to all the questions, but we'll grab some of the questions and then send them over and get your thoughts, and then we'll get them back out to the people who were on the webinar. I can't thank you enough for joining and sharing us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. And thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.